Think so. Welcome to our Sunday evening Bible study. And tonight we'll begin a new series on the book of Ezekiel. And it was a little unnerving, but every time I announced that, Paul Schittle smiled like, I had to stop looking at him. No. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, we thank you for this day you've given to us. We thank you for the privilege of studying your word. First of all, to have it because you have spoken to us, and then to understand it because you've given us your spirit. And I pray that you would speak to us through your word by your spirit as we study this book. May we understand it. May we know how to apply it. And we would give you all the thanks for your grace and mercy in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. So we start a new study tonight on the book of Ezekiel. And let me just remind you of something that I've been saying all along, that this is not an in-depth study, not intended to be an in-depth study. I won't give you a lot of details. Probably tonight will be the night that I give you more details than maybe any other night. So it's if you want the details are available. Okay, as you go through it, or as we go through it, it's not a verse by verse exposition. And those expositional studies are available. If you'd like to get a book or a couple of books and read them, they're available for you. If you want to just get some of the more details concerning the history and the background and the names of and the succession of kings and all of that, you can go to 2 Kings and read a lot of this, or you can go online. I did that just to see, and you can Google anything you want about Ezekiel. And there are graphs and charts and maps. I thought about maybe making some maps, but they're available. You can find those. And if you want those kinds of details, they're readily available. And before we get into the actual study of the book, we have to think about the historical background of Ezekiel. So that's what we're going to do tonight, primarily, is just look at the historical background and think about where Ezekiel fits in and what's going on in the book. You can see here on the whiteboard that I have something entitled Key Dates and Texts that should probably be flipped, but we're going to look at some key dates and some key texts, and then we'll look at some major themes, or the main themes in the book, and along the way, I'll just talk about some of the important things here. Now, our interest is in the book of Ezekiel, and Ezekiel does give us what we could call some timestamps. Throughout the book, there are some timestamps to tell us, this is when this happened, and here's when this happened, and it's chronological, and we can just follow the timestamps so that we know when everything happens. And it might seem unimportant, but I think the more we understand the timeline and how the text fits into the timeline, it'll help us. Now, generally, Ezekiel is divided into two sections. This is kind of a generalization. But beginning in chapter 4 are pronouncements of judgment on Israel. Now, let me say something about that. Because by now, Israel technically doesn't exist. Because there was a division, right, between Israel and Judah. And you can go back and study that. After Solomon, remember the next king, his son, was even harsher than Solomon, and they split. And they split into what is called the northern and the southern kingdoms. The northern kingdom was 10 tribes. The southern kingdom was 2 tribes. And that was the division between Israel and Judah. So it's you have to go back to the year 722. Now that's not in Ezekiel, right? But you have to go back to the year 722 when the Assyrian Empire, overtook Israel, the 10 tribes. And under Assyria, the 10 tribes were obliterated. They're dissolved. And this points to the difference in strategy between Assyria and Babylon. You say, how could they disappear? How could they just be gone? Well, because the Assyrians, when they captured a people and overtook them, they dispersed them. They spread them throughout the entire empire. Why? Well, to discourage them, to take away their religious identity, take away their ethnic identity, to disperse them so much so that there are no leaders among them. They're not able to conspire and work together. They're just dispersed. They're gone. That was their strategy. Much like the Roman Empire. Remember, the Romans did that as well. And so the Assyrian Empire did the same thing. They dispersed the 10 tribes throughout the entire empire, and in a little while, they just don't exist. They are assimilated into the kingdom, into the empire. And they lose their identity, so that by the time Ezekiel prophesies, there is no, northern tribes. There's no northern kingdom. And yet, Ezekiel and the other prophets continue to refer to Judah as Israel. You'll see this often in the book. He calls them Israel. Now, Ezekiel is prophesying in Babylon, right? To the captives. But he's not prophesying about the captives. He's prophesying about Jerusalem and those who are still in Jerusalem. So there he is. Remember, they're by the river Kibar, and the Lord comes to him, and we'll see all these things next week. The Lord comes to him. He begins, he's called into ministry. He's commissioned for ministry and strengthened for ministry. But the Lord comes to him, and he begins to prophesy to the exiles in Babylon about those who are in Jerusalem. Now, at the same time, and this is again, these are things that you can flesh out, you can find out all these details. At the same time, there's another prophet in Jerusalem, Jeremiah. So they're contemporaries. Jeremiah begins before Ezekiel does, but then God raises up Ezekiel. Jeremiah is prophesying in Jerusalem. Ezekiel is in Babylon prophesying about the Jews who are in Jerusalem. So you just kind of have to keep that in mind. Because if you don't remember that, sometimes it gets confusing as to who's he talking about here. So mostly talking about the Jews who are in Jerusalem. But in 722, the Assyrians, they captured, as it were, Israel. They dispersed them throughout the empire. But then, about the year 616, the Babylonian Empire, which was on the rise and had been active, and you can read about these things in the Bible or in history, and the Babylonians started to grow, and they went against the Assyrians. And in 612, Nineveh fell. Nineveh was the capital city of Assyria. And so in 612, Nineveh falls, and now we have one huge Babylonian empire. And you can read about it. There are people on the run, as it were, and there's a bunch of things going on. There's the Egyptians. They're still players in the world politics. And you can read about those things in 2 Kings. So there are a couple of things that happened before this. 722, we have the Syrians. They overtake the 10 northern tribes, disperse them. And then in 612, Nineveh falls to the Babylonians. And this gets us right to the doorstep of Ezekiel. In 605, Nebuchadnezzar comes to power. His father dies and he becomes the king. And there's an uprising. I'm just kind of skipping over some things. There's an uprising. And so in 597, Nebuchadnezzar comes against Jerusalem. The Babylonians come against Jerusalem. They put down a rebellion, and they take a bunch of captives back to Babylon. Now that's in 597. In that wave, Daniel is taken. So another contemporary, right? Daniel. Daniel is taken back to Babylon in 597 in that first wave of captives going in. But there's going to come another rebellion under Zedekiah. And so again, Nebuchadnezzar is going to show up, and I'll show you where that falls in the timeline here. And so it's in that second wave that Ezekiel is taken into Babylon. Ezekiel and others. Now, Ezekiel starts this whole book off this way, doesn't he? We see that in 1 through 3, that in the 30th year, and we'll talk a little bit more about this next week, that would probably be Ezekiel's age. He's 30 years old. And that's when men entered into the priesthood, and Ezekiel would have been a priest. And so, it's a rough way to start your priesthood. In the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, and so, there's actually, we know the actual day of the month even, right? As I was among the exiles by the Kibar Canal, the heavens were open and I saw visions of God. And on the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim. So this is the 5th year. So this would put us into the year 592. Okay? So that's 592. It's the 5th year. Since all of this, since that first rebellion, and Nebuchadnezzar, he put up a Jehoiakim as the king, and I'll get into some more of those details later. But that's when all of this starts to take place, in the year 592. Kurt, is this in your way? Can you see that okay? All right. So now, let me go through these dates and the text where we find these things, and I'll just write a few of the events that are taking place so that we can kind of get this framework in our minds. Because, as you'll see, he's prophesying in Babylon about things that are happening in Jerusalem, and this occurs over 20 years, and there's a break, and there are things going on, and it's hard sometimes now, who's this about, who's he talking about in these judgments, who's he talking about in these judgments, and so I think maybe a timeline will be helpful. And by the way, you can go online and you can find a timeline and you can print it off. You may not find it exactly like this. These details are found in this commentary by Block, and I'll be using this even tonight. I'll quote from Block, and this is just volume 1. There are 2 volumes, so this is chapters 1 through 24, and this is considered like the gold standard of commentaries on Ezekiel. was written in 1997, and everybody references Block. And so this information primarily, not exclusively, but primarily comes from Block. So we know that in 1 through 3, beginning with, this is the 5th year, which is now 592. The next timestamp is in 316. So let's take our Bibles and let's run through this. Let's just quickly run through this in chapter 3, verse 16. And at the end of 7 days, the word of the Lord came to me again. So, after 7 days. So this would be 7 days after the Lord first came to him. So what year would this be? It's just 7 days later, right? So this would be 592 still. I'm just going to write it a little closer over here. 316, this is still 592 when the Lord comes to him again. The next timestamp is in chapter 8, verse 1. And as you know, it might seem kind of tedious, but at the end, I'll point out why I think this is important. So verse 1 in chapter 8, in the 6th year, in the 6th month, on the 5th day. So now, we started out in the 5th year, right? So now we're in the 6th year. So what year is that? 591, right? So this is 591. The next timestamp, we have to jump all the way over to chapter 20. Chapter 20 and verse 1. In the 7th year. So now, you know, from chapters 8 to 20, it's just 1 year, right? We started in the 5th year, we noticed the 6th year, now we're in the 7th year. So that's obviously 590, right? Then we jump to chapter 24. Verse 1. In the 9th year, in the 10th month, on the 10th day. Now, scholars who, carefully, look at the years and the month would tell us that this is the 9th year, but because we're now in the 10th month, it would be closer to the year 588. That's how Block identifies this year as 588. And then we go to chapter 26 and verse 1. In the 11th year. So, in the 11th year, we would be in about the year 586. Now notice when the next one is chapter 29 and verse 1. 29, 1. In the 10th year. Well, wait, what? The 10th year. So he went back a year, didn't he? He'd been going along chronologically. He goes back to the 10th year. And it's something that, it's a little detail you have to pay attention to. So then this would be 587. And we go to 30, verse 20. In the 11th year, so now he's back to the 11th year again, isn't he? And so that would be 586. And then 31, 1. 30, 20, 11th year, 31, 1 in the 11th year. Still that year, isn't it? So it's the year 586 still when we get to chapter 31. And then 32, 17. In the 12th year, in the 12th month. So this would be approximately the year 585. And 3321. 3321 in the 12th year. So it's the same year, isn't it? It's still 585. And then there's one more in chapter 40. And this is the last of the timestamps. In the 25th year. Now that's a big jump. So now we are in year 572. That would be the 25th year, remember, from 592. You had the first year, the second year, the third year, 10th year, 11th year, back to the 10th. These are the years since this, 592. So what we see then, I wrote the wrong number there, didn't I? It's 572, not 575, I'm sorry. 572. The 20th year. So that tells us that Ezekiel's ministry, his prophetic ministry, lasted for 20 years. So it's 20 years from when he starts until the last timestamp, which is found in chapter 40. So this ministry spans 20 years. Now, let's go back and write a few events that are happening while he is prophesying. As I said earlier, in 597, that's the first wave, and in 592, Ezekiel is in Babylon. And from chapters 4 through 24, so 4, somewhere in here, through chapter 24, the end of 24, this period, these are all the judgments against Israel. So 4 through 24 are all about judgment against Israel. And then, beginning with chapter 25, really, we don't have a timestamp there, but from 25 through 32, so that would be down here, are God's judgments. This is judgment against the nations. Israel's enemies, the nations around. God is going to pronounce judgments against them through Ezekiel. So his ministry is primarily divided up that way, and then from that point on, beginning in 32, from that point on, it shifts. These chapters are all about judgment. But now we have prophecies of what? Of restoration. Of restoration. And so the book ends with restoration. Hope. Hope for Israel. That God is going to restore Israel. Now, in 588, and we see that 24:1 is the year 588, and in here, let me see if I got my note right here. In 588, Nebuchadnezzar, I'm going to just say Neb, he begins a siege against Jerusalem. The siege begins. Now, why has he set up a siege against Jerusalem? Because of another rebellion, Zedekiah. And Zedekiah was the king. He was like a puppet king set up. And for 8 years, he was, like a faithful, loyal puppy dog to Nebuchadnezzar. But then, after 8 years, he spent 3 years involved in an alignment, a conspiracy to overthrow Babylon, which is stupid, right? It was just a dumb thing to do. But he begins a rebellion against Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar finally has had enough. And we're going to see these things as we go through again. But Nebuchadnezzar's had enough, and so they begin a siege against the city of Jerusalem. And then, in chapter 33, they get the message that Jerusalem falls. If you've read it, and I'm sure you have, a messenger comes and says the city has fallen, which is crushing. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a few minutes. But they get the crushing news that the city has fallen. And then, this is the fulfillment of God's judgment on them. And then, after that, God begins a prophecy, a message of hope, of restoration. Now, we know, and we'll talk about this at another time, there is a remnant. And it is a message of hope for the remnant, that God has not forgotten you. And he will restore your relationship with Yahweh. And I'll talk about that more in just a minute. But on this timeline, then, we can see the time frame for Ezekiel's ministry, when it begins, and it extends into 572. And while he's doing this, there's a lot going on in the world. There's a rebellion, and Nebuchadnezzar, squashes the rebellion, and not only squashes the rebellion, but he builds a siege ramp against Jerusalem. This took 3 years to do. But they finally, breached the walls of Jerusalem, and they went in and destroyed everything. They set the city on fire. That was what he was told to do. And so the captain there, the leader, they go in, they set the city on fire, and they destroy it, right? They destroy the walls, they destroy the city, and they destroy the temple. And Jerusalem falls 3 years later. And so those are the events that are going on while Ezekiel is prophesying. Now, I'm going to use the main themes idea to just kind of flesh out a couple of things here, okay? So let's talk then about some of the main themes as we go through Ezekiel that we should be looking for. These are not in any order of importance. These are just some of the main themes. And a couple of these themes are taken out of Bloch's book. A couple are taken from some other books. But I think this is probably the main theme. What's the main theme? What's the big idea in Ezekiel? It's that God is not like us. God is other. We call this the otherness of God. When we go through chapter 1, you all know what's in chapter 1. It's the vision of God, right? Well, what do we learn about God in chapter 1? He's not like us. He's nothing like us. And it's so foolish for Israel, for the world today, for Christianity today, to think that God is anything like us. He's not. He's other than us. One of the main themes out of chapter 1 is the holiness of God. God is glorious and God is holy. And we'll see that next week. And in the holiness of God, the main idea, remember, is it includes moral and ethical holiness. But the main idea of holiness is otherness. God is other. Because what is holiness? It means to be separated and set apart. God is separated and set apart from us in every way. And we'll see this theme throughout the book of Ezekiel. That God is not like us. And this is a very important lesson. We need to know this, right? Because what happens? We want to make God like us. Even in Christianity, we want to make God like us sometimes. We think, we feel, this is how we would do it. So we say, well, then God is like that. But He's not. He even says it in here. I'm not like you. And so we'll flesh that theme out as we go through the book. But God is not like us. A second theme, and this is a very important theme as well, is, and I'm just putting these sort of in regular terms, is that God always keeps His word. God always keeps His word. Well, in the context of the book of Ezekiel, the context of Israel, Judah that is in Babylon, and the judgment that God is bringing, this is a message that God sends out over and over. I said I would do this. I said it. And I will do it. Well, what is it that God said? For this, we could turn back to Deuteronomy 28. Let's go ahead and just turn there real quickly. Deuteronomy 28. And so, this goes back. This is a part of the context of Ezekiel. Deuteronomy 28. And so this is going to take a few minutes, but let me just read Deuteronomy 28. And this is part of, the Mosaic law. This is God communicating His law and, His requirements. But He's communicating the covenant, the conditions for the covenant. Now notice chapter 28. If you faithfully obey the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all his commandments that I command you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. These are the blessings of the covenant. The blessings of the covenant. And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you obey the voice of the Lord your God. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of your womb, the fruit of your ground, the fruit of your cattle, the increase of your herds, and the young of your flock. And blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in. Blessed shall you be when you go out. The Lord will cause your enemies who rise against you to be defeated before you. They shall come out against you one way and flee before you 7 ways. The Lord will command the blessing on you in your barns and in all that you undertake, and he will bless you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. The Lord will establish you as a people holy to himself, as he has sworn to you, if you could keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his ways. And all the peoples of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they shall be afraid of you. And the Lord will make you abound in prosperity, in the fruit of your womb, and in the fruit of your livestock, and in the fruit of your ground, within the land the Lord swore to your fathers to give you. The Lord will open to you his good treasury, the heavens, to give the rain to your land in its season, and to bless all the work of your hands. And you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. And the Lord will make you the head and not the tail, and you shall go up and not down, if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you today, being careful to do them. And if you do not turn aside from any of the words that I have commanded you today, to the right hand or to the left, you go after other gods to serve them. Don't do that. But, you see, there's a list of blessings, right? But, now come the curses. If you do not obey the voice of the Lord your God, or be careful to do all his commandments and his statutes that I command you today, then all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. Cursed shall you be in the city, cursed shall you be in the field, cursed shall you be in your basket and your kneading bowl, cursed shall you be in the fruit of your womb and in the fruit of your ground, and the increase of your herds, the young of your flock. Cursed shall you be when you come in, cursed shall you be when you go out. The Lord will send on you curses, confusion, frustration, and all that you undertake to do, until you are destroyed and perish quickly on account of the evil of your deeds, because you have forsaken me. The Lord will make the pestilence stick to you until it has consumed you off the land that you are entering to take possession of it. The Lord will strike you with wasting disease and with fever, inflammation, fiery heat, with drought, with blight, with mildew. They shall pursue you until you perish. And the heavens over your head shall be bronze, and the earth under your feet shall be iron. The Lord will make the rain of your land powder. From heaven dust shall come down on you until you are destroyed. The Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You shall go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them. And you shall be a horror to all the kingdoms of the earth. And your dead bodies shall be food for all the birds of the air and for the beasts of the earth. And there shall be no one to frighten them away. The Lord will strike you with the boils of the earth. You get what's going on here, right? And we could keep reading, but we don't have to. Jump over to verse 45. And all these curses shall come upon you and pursue you and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord your God to keep his commandments and his statutes that he commanded you. And there shall be a sign and a wonder against you and your offspring forever, because you did not serve the Lord your God with joyfulness and gladness of heart, because of the abundance of all things. Therefore you shall serve your enemies, whom the Lord will send against you. Verse 49, the Lord will bring a nation against you from far away, from the end of the earth, swooping down like the eagle, a nation whose language you do not understand, a hard-faced nation who shall not respect the old or show mercy to the young. Verse 52, and they shall besiege you in all your towns and your high and fortified walls, etc., etc. We don't have to keep reading, right? In the covenant, there's a promise of blessings. For who? For those who keep his commandments. And not only keep his commandments, but delight in keeping his commandments. And the Lord will bless you. But if you do not keep my commandments, these curses will fall upon you. Upon who? All who do not keep his commandments. Those who do not love him and serve him. And so, what happens? Does God keep his word? He does. This is what Ezekiel is all about. God is keeping his word. He said he would do this. God always does what he says he will do, doesn't he? And this is a theme running through the book of Ezekiel. Turning back to Ezekiel now, let's just look at a couple of verses here. And I think this is so important. And let's go to chapter 17. Chapter 17. Verse 24, but let's jump down to the end of verse 24. We don't have to read the whole verse, but at the end of 24 he says, I've spoken and I will do it. You see that? He's pronouncing judgment upon them and he's saying, I have spoken and I will do it. Look at chapter 22, verse 14. 22, verse 14. And at the end of the verse, he says the same thing. I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will do it. There's another important thought here at the end of verse 16. And you shall know that I am the Lord. I don't know if I'll get into this later, so let me say it here. Why is God judging? And why has he sent Ezekiel as a spokesman to tell of these judgments that are coming? Ultimately, it's so that they would know the Lord. They would know that this is the Lord who has done this. Why? Because his name shall be great among the nations. It's for his name's sake. Always has been, hasn't it? It seems odd that he does this and he sends Ezekiel to make this point. You need to know the Lord. And you can see the Lord and what the Lord is going to do. And everything you need to know about the Lord, you will see in the judgment that is coming and in the restoration that follows. I'm doing all these things so that they may know me. Turn to chapter 24. Verse 14 begins with this thought, I am the Lord. I have spoken, and it shall come to pass. I will do it. I will not go back. I will not spare. I will not relent. According to your ways and your deeds you will be judged, declares the Lord. I am the Lord. I said it, I will do it. And in his words that follow, he's basically saying, and I won't have compassion. I won't stop. I won't hear your cries for mercy. I said I would do it, I'm going to do it. That's it. Chapter 36, just to show you how this theme is woven through the whole book of prophecy here. In chapter 36 and verse 36, then the nations that are left all around you shall know that I am the Lord. I have rebuilt the ruined places and replanted that which was desolate. I am the Lord. I have spoken, and I will do it. You see, what God's concern here is then in the restoration, the nations all around will know that it was of the Lord. Why? He wants them to know him. He wants them to know what he is like. And I have spoken, and I will do it. And then one more, it's in 37, so just across the page in verse 14. And I will put my spirit within you, and you shall live, and I will place you in your own land, and then you shall know that I am the Lord. I have spoken, I will do it, declares the Lord. As I thought about, what might be a title for this series, one book and sermon series is called God Has Spoken. There's another sermon series, God Strengthens, taken from the name of Ezekiel and the fact in the restoration, God strengthens. I'm inclined, I don't have this is not an official title, but because of this theme, I think of Ezekiel, I am Yahweh. I said it, I will do it. That would be a good theme. I said it, I will do it. He said it way back with Moses. And now it's all coming to fruition. He said it. He's going to do it. This is a good reminder. If God says it, he will do it. He is Yahweh. He is the God who speaks, and he is the God who acts. And we'll see that as we go through the book. God has spoken, and God will act. God will do it. And so, this is a major theme through the book of Ezekiel, that God keeps his word, he has spoken, and he will do it. Another theme, though I really can't say much about it tonight, just something to be on the lookout as we go through it, is that God holds every individual responsible for his own sin. God is judging the nation, but he points out in several places that every individual is responsible for his own sin. There's individual responsibility. Another thing we could say about God is that God judges. Well, this is a theme, right? This is a major theme. God judges. And following up that, we could say that God is gracious. He restores. God restores. This is what he's going to do for the remnant. And these are themes as we go through, and we'll talk about them more when we get to them. We could also say, and I think this is something that's very important, and we see it throughout the book, is that this is an understatement. God cares for his people. That's an understatement. God cares for his people. And we're going to see this in several ways. One of the things that we'll look at when we get to it is the jealousy of God. God communicates some of the reasons why he's judging them, and he uses some specific sins, but just generally, he also speaks, just of just general wickedness and general sinfulness. And remember, he even uses the metaphor of marriage. They are the bride, and he is the groom. He is the husband. And the husband is jealous for his bride. But jealousy with God, it's never a negative thing. With men, it is often a sinful thing, but not with God. And we'll talk about this more later, but when we think of the jealousy of God, why is God jealous? Because he loves his people so deeply. He is passionate for his people. Therefore, to protect his people, to guard his people from going astray, he's jealous and will act. And he will wipe out all the wickedness and all of the evil from around them. But he will preserve his people. Why? Because he cares for them. He loves them. Some people will look at the book of Ezekiel and they'll say, well, this isn't a very good picture of God. And this is one of the reasons that Ezekiel is often ignored. Because it's a rough picture of God. The vengeful God. You know, you either obey me or I'm going to smash you. You don't obey me, smash, there you go. He kills people, he kills nations. You know, a lot of the critics of the Bible look at God that way, don't they? But why is he like that? Why does he do that? Well, we know it's for his name, right? So that we would know him. But behind it is because he loves his people so deeply. He's passionate about his people, passionate about his relationship with his people. He is a jealous God and will not tolerate other gods because he cares for us and he loves us and he will come and restore his people. So we'll talk about that a little more later when we come to it in the text. But just a thought that God cares for his people. This is another theme. So here's just a number of themes that we'll kind of flesh out as we go through the book. And in just a couple of minutes, really literally, I'll do this in just a couple of minutes, I want to give some key words. Words to be looking for. I won't take the time to write them down. I'll just give them to you. The Lord Yahweh. The Lord Yahweh. That's used 217 times in Ezekiel. 217 times. The Lord Yahweh. Adonai Yahweh. The sovereign God. The Lord Yahweh. And so we will see this over and over and over again, 217 times. Also, we'll see the Son of Man, or just Son of Man. Son of Man. Almost always, not entirely, but almost always, speaking of Ezekiel, God addresses him as Son of Man. He doesn't call him Ezekiel. He calls him Son of Man. 93 times. And this probably points to the fact of his humanity, that he is a member of a fallen race, and he is not like God. You were like man, Son of Man. So God repeatedly just reminds him who he is. You're a man. You're a son of a man. I am Yahweh. So those are major words. And then also the house or family of Israel. The house or family of Israel. 83 times. You'll find that in Ezekiel. Sometimes it applies to the northern kingdom, sometimes to the southern kingdom, sometimes specifically to the remnant. But key words, it's used often, 83 times. And then the last one I'll mention, and we've already seen this, to know. To know. 54 times in Ezekiel. As I said earlier, God's actions, God's revelation, his judgment, the restoration is all that we would know. To know what? To know him. And everything that we need to know about God, you'll find in his actions. What he does reveals who he is and what he is like. And so, and ultimately, it's that we would know him, right? God acts that we might know him. And that's what he says over and over, 54 times. And I'll end with a quote, or a couple of quotes from a block on this subject. He says it better than I ever could. The formula to know occurs 54 times in a pure form and 18 times in an expanded form. And they become prophetic proof statements according to which the actions of God are designed to bring the observer to the recognition of Yahweh's person and his sovereign involvement in our human experience. Now, here's what I like. Ezekiel will offer no doctrinal speeches, no description of Yahweh's nature. It is in the narrative of history that his character is proclaimed. This refrain, to know, calls on the hearer of Ezekiel's oracles to stand back and watch Yahweh act, whether it be in judgment or salvation, and then draw the obvious conclusions. Did you get that? He doesn't describe God, doesn't tell us about his nature, doesn't list his qualities or his characteristics, his attributes. He just says, here's what God's going to do. And you can know God. Just as the deliverance of the people from Egypt centuries earlier had been intended to oppress the Israelites, the Egyptians, and the world with the presence and character of Yahweh, so too will his acts of judgment on a rebellious people. And then in another place he writes, Ezekiel offers neither sublime poetry on the attributes of God, nor lofty lectures on his personality. As in the events associated with Israel's original exodus from Egypt, knowledge of his person and character is gained by observing his actions. Indeed, this collection of prophecies leaves the impression that when Yahweh acts in judgment against his people, it is not primarily to punish them, but that they and the world might know him. The same is true of his restorative actions on behalf of Israel. His primary goal in bringing down foreign powers is not simply to destroy the enemies of Israel, but to manifest his greatness, his glory, and his holiness. And similarly, his aim in restoring Israel is to demonstrate his holiness. So, in a sense, what's Ezekiel all about? It's to know God. To know that God is not like us. That God always keeps his word. God holds every individual responsible. God does in fact judge. God restores. And God cares for his people. And all of these things are so that we might know him. How much do we know about God through the book of Ezekiel? The problem is we don't study Ezekiel. But that's why it's here, to know him. His glory, his greatness, his sovereignty. And so, key words, which we will look at as we find them in the text as we go through this book. So, I've taken up an hour tonight. I didn't get everything that I wanted to cover, but do you have any questions, comments, anything at all?